Story 1. The Hospital of Horror, Waverly Hills, USA. In Louisville, Kentucky, the Waverly Hills Sanatorium was opened in 1910 to treat tuberculosis patients. During the epidemic, it is estimated that more than 60,000 people died on site, many of them under terrifying circumstances. After its closure, the hospital became a landmark of the supernatural. Stories of hauntings became common, and the death tunnel, an underground passage used to transport bodies, is the epicenter of its darkest tales. In 2013, a group of paranormal investigators visited the site for a live stream. They entered at midnight, equipped with cameras and presence detectors. On the first floor, they immediately noticed sudden temperature drops. One of them, Jake, felt something icy touch his neck. The camera captured the exact moment he turned his head, but no one was there. Faint children's laughter echoed through the empty corridor. On the second floor, they entered a room known as 502, where a nurse had allegedly committed suicide. The door slammed shut on its own, and a strong ammonia smell filled the air. When they tried to leave, they found the doorknob covered in bloody handprints. Suddenly, they heard rapid footsteps approaching, but the hallway was empty. The cameras recorded a female figure in an old uniform, watching them from the doorway. Jake began behaving strangely. He claimed to hear voices crying for help and started scratching himself compulsively. The group decided to leave, but the death tunnel was their only exit. The darkness seemed to consume the light from their flashlights. Moans and screams echoed, growing closer. Jake vanished before their eyes, and all they found was his fallen camera. Upon reviewing the footage, a pale figure with black eyes was seen following the group from the start. Jake was never found, and the other three abandoned paranormal investigations. Today, the sanatorium is a tourist site, but many claim to hear screams and footsteps, especially on the quietest nights. Story 2. The Ouija Well, Bridgeport, Connecticut. In 1978, in the quiet town of Bridgeport, Connecticut, three friends decided to use a Ouija board near an old well in the backyard of one of their homes. The area was already shrouded in mystery, as the property dated back to the 18th century and had been abandoned for years. During the session, something strange happened. The pointer began spinning frantically before stopping on the letter M. When they asked, "Who's there?" they heard muffled sounds coming from the well. The next day, one of the friends, Charlie, convinced the others to descend into the well to investigate. Using an improvised rope, he was the first to go down. As he illuminated the damp walls, he noticed scratch marks on the stone, as if someone had desperately tried to climb out. Before he could go further, he started screaming that something was grabbing his feet. He was pulled up, but he was in shock. In the days that followed, Charlie began acting strangely. He claimed to see a man in a hat with glowing eyes everywhere he went. The other two friends also experienced nightmares about the well and heard footsteps at night. On the third day, Charlie's family found him dead in his room. He had written the word "mine" on the wall in blood before hanging himself. The police could not explain the incident. When the other two friends decided to investigate the well again, they found an old artifact, a broken crucifix with Latin inscriptions. Suddenly, a gust of wind surged from the well, knocking them down. They fled and never returned. The house was demolished in 1985, but locals still claim to hear whispers and see shadows where the well once stood. Story 3. The Belvedere House Massacre, Montreal, Canada. In 1923, a tragedy shook the city of Montreal, Canada. In Belvedere House, a luxurious mansion built by an aristocratic family, all its members were found dead on a cold November night. Police concluded that the father, Lord Hamilton, had murdered his wife and children before taking his own life. However, the details were baffling. The weapons were clean, and the bodies were arranged in a ritualistic pattern. In 1980, the mansion was reopened as a historical museum. Soon after, reports of strange occurrences began. Visitors claimed to hear whispers in French and footsteps on the upper floor, even when the place was empty. In 1995, a caretaker disappeared without a trace, leaving only his flashlight in the basement. This fueled more speculation about the house. In 2017, a documentarian decided to spend the night in the mansion to explore the myths. He recorded sounds of knocking and a woman singing a lullaby. In the basement, he found an old mirror covered by a cloth. When he uncovered it, he saw not only his reflection, but that of a woman behind him, who vanished when he turned around. After this, he abandoned the project and never spoke about the incident again. The Belvedere House remains open to the public, but with one condition: no one is allowed inside after sunset. Guides claim that when night falls, laughter and screams echo through the walls. Some visitors say they see figures in the mansion's mirrors, watching them with glowing, expressionless eyes. Story 4. The Ritual in Clapham Woods, England. Clapham Woods, located in West Sussex, England, is a place of ancient mystery and modern terror. Its dense thickets and twisted trees have long been the subject of local folklore, but over the last 2 centuries, the tales have grown darker. Stories of strange lights, occult rituals, and inexplicable disappearances have transformed the forest into a place to be feared. Despite warnings from locals, thrill seekers and researchers continue to venture into its depths, often with horrifying results. In 1990, 2 friends, Mark and Daniel, decided to explore the woods for a photography project on haunted locations. Mark, a skeptic, dismissed the stories as mere superstition, while Daniel, fascinated by the paranormal, hoped to capture evidence of the supernatural. They arrived at dusk, the sun casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. As they entered the woods, the air grew colder, and the usual sounds of wildlife fell eerily silent, replaced only by the crunching of leaves underfoot. Not long into their hike, they stumbled upon a peculiar clearing. At its center was a large, flat stone covered in strange symbols, faded but still visible. Surrounding the stone were small cairns made of stacked stones, each one meticulously balanced. Daniel eagerly began photographing the site, while Mark felt an inexplicable unease. As he examined the stone closer, he noticed what looked like burn marks and faint traces of a dark, rust-colored substance. Blood, perhaps. The air seemed heavier here, and both men felt as though they were being watched. While Mark examined the symbols, Daniel ventured a few steps further into the clearing. He froze when he heard what sounded like whispers, faint and fragmented, coming from all around. He called out to Mark, who dismissed it as the wind. But then Mark himself heard it, a low, guttural hum that seemed to emanate from the very ground. They decided to press on, though both felt a growing sense of dread. As they walked deeper into the forest, the path seemed to twist and loop in impossible ways, as if the woods were shifting around them. The trees grew thicker, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the fading light. Hours passed, and the pair found themselves completely lost. The forest seemed to swallow them whole, their flashlights barely piercing the suffocating darkness. Then they saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance. Relieved, they assumed it was another hiker, or perhaps a camper. As they approached, however, their relief turned to terror. The light came from a circle of torches surrounding another stone altar, this one much larger and freshly stained with what looked like blood. Around the altar stood hooded figures, their faces obscured, chanting in a language neither Mark nor Daniel recognized. The chant was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and the very air seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. Mark whispered to Daniel to take a picture, but as Daniel raised his camera, the chanting stopped abruptly. The hooded figures turned their heads in unison, their movements unnaturally stiff, as if they were marionettes on strings. Though their faces were still hidden, both men felt the piercing weight of unseen eyes staring directly at them. Before they could move, A deafening scream erupted from the circle, a sound so primal and otherworldly that it froze them in place. The figures began to move toward them, their footsteps silent despite the dry leaves underfoot. Panic overtook them, and they ran blindly through the forest. The light from their flashlights flickered, as if struggling against an oppressive force. Behind them, the chanting resumed, now louder and more frenzied, echoing unnaturally through the trees. Mark tripped over a root and fell hard, scraping his hands and knees. As Daniel helped him up, they both noticed deep claw marks gouged into the tree trunks around them, marks that hadn't been there moments before. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, they realized the forest had gone completely silent again. No whispers, no chants, no footsteps. Just an eerie, all-encompassing quiet. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, not hooded but pale and skeletal, its skin stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its mouth hung open as if in a silent scream. It raised a bony finger and pointed directly at Mark. Mark screamed as an overwhelming pain shot through his chest, as though his very heart was being squeezed. Daniel grabbed him, dragging him through the trees, but the figure seemed to glide effortlessly behind them, always keeping pace. Finally, they burst out of the forest and onto a road where a passing driver stopped to help. The figure was gone, but Mark collapsed, unconscious, his chest covered in deep, jagged scratches. After the incident, Mark was never the same. He suffered from vivid nightmares of the forest and the hooded figures, waking up with fresh scratches on his body each morning. His health deteriorated rapidly, and he became paranoid, insisting that they were watching him. Daniel, too, was haunted by the experience. He developed a fear of the dark and avoided wooded areas for the rest of his life. Years later, Daniel returned to Clapham Woods during the day, hoping to find closure. The clearing with the stone altar was gone, and no trace of the hooded figures could be found. However, he did find one thing: a photograph, weathered and faded, showing the stone altar with Daniel and Mark standing near it. The photograph was impossible. It had been taken from the perspective of the hooded figures. He left the forest and never spoke of it again. Locals say that the chanting can still be heard on quiet nights, and strange lights often flicker among the trees. Clapham Woods remains a place of terror, its secrets buried beneath its ancient, malevolent roots.